Chapter 22 Commanding Officer, Operation Payback. Once back on Sigurdsson, Jan surrendered command of Boudica to her next captain, and she and Bill moved into a flagged townhouse on the base. She requested a meeting with Admiral Birkin and Admiral Durand in a secure room. She had had an idea while on Bahia. "Captain Childers, come in, have a seat," Birkin said.
"Thank you, sir."
"How was Bahia, Captain? All tightened up?"
"Yes, sir. Pretty much under control now."
"Good. So what can we do for you?"
"Admiral, I want to communicate a sentence or two to an old card club I used to belong to. We had our club meetings here a couple years back."
"Ah, yes. The card club that met in the basement here. 10 of you, weren't there?"
"Yep, that's the one."
"Well, Captain, I don't know if that club is still meeting or not."
"Understood, sir. But if it were, and someone could get a hold of them, is there any way to get a message to them?"
"A new game for them to try?"
"Yes, sir."
"Do you think they'd be interested, Captain?"
"Yes, sir. It's a very interesting game."
"There might be a way. Tell you what, you write your message and I'll see if I can't find out where they moved to."
"That would be great, sir."
Durand went to a credenza and opened the top drawer. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and a pen and slid them across to Jan. It wasn't normal paper. It felt different, slicker, almost oily. The pen was also different somehow, not a normal production pen. It looked like a limited production, in-house item. "You go ahead and write your message on that sheet, Captain, and then fold it in half 3 times. Birkin and Durand made it a point to be looking elsewhere as she wrote. This is what she wrote, in the block letters every one of her subordinates could recognize as hers from across a room. "Small, durable, H-5 capable interstellar drone as courier ship or as missile. Childers." Jan folded the paper in half, then again, and a 3rd time.
"Okay, all set."
Durand drew a plastic envelope out of the drawer and held it open to her. She slid the paper in. He then ran the envelope through some sort of fancy sealer on the credenza. She didn't know what it was, but she could guess. If the envelope was opened in normal air, or anything other than some specific environment, the special paper and special ink would come apart and leave nothing but dust in the envelope. "We'll try to see if we can get your mail through for you, Captain, but I really wouldn't expect any response."
"I don't expect a response, Admiral, but I think my friends in the club would really enjoy that game."
The idea Jan had thought of on Bahia was for a ship capable of traveling in hyperspace 5. They had never seriously discussed such a thing in the project because they felt it would be impossible to build a manned ship to take the gravitational gradients, much less the shear forces. Jan's idea was for an unmanned ship. If they could build a message drone capable of hyperspace 5 and structurally robust enough to take the stresses, it could make the run from, say, Sigurdsson to Calumet in half an hour, which would mean a military response from Sigurdsson with manned ships capable of hyperspace 4 could be only 16 hours away. Such drones could also be used for routine courier service, allowing interstellar messaging with transit times under an hour. Finally, such drones could be used as interstellar missiles. Topped with a nuclear warhead, such a missile could take out a fixed military installation within a couple of hours of launch anywhere in human space. Given that it was unmanned, speeds could go even faster. Without people on board, sustained accelerations could go much higher than the 3Gs the group had discussed as a practical maximum. If you could accelerate such a drone at 10 Gs, the flight times and velocities could get very ugly, very fast for any defender. Jan didn't know how fast a battleship or cruiser drive could go without a battleship or cruiser attached, but she suspected that 10G was easily in reach. They settled into their old routines on Sigurdsson. Jan was on planet leave between assignments while Bill reported into Intelligence Division when they returned. He was going into the office every day. About 3 weeks after their return to Sigurdsson, Bill started being distracted. His attention would wander off from their conversation.
"Bill?"
"Sorry, hun. Wool gathering."
"Is something going on at work?"
"I couldn't tell you if there was."
"I know that. I meant anything about you, particularly."
"No, not at all."
"Anything I need to know?"
"No," he said. And, after a pause, "Not yet." The next day, Jan heard about what was being called the Waldheim Massacre.
4 Commonwealth light ships in Waldheim had been suckered into chasing a destroyer making an incursion, and 2 heavy cruisers popped out of hyper and blew them out of space. When Bill got home, Jan asked him about it. "Did you hear about the Waldheim massacre?" "I heard about it through the rumor mill." "Anything you can tell me beyond the rumors?"
"No." 3 days later, Jan received an urgent request to meet with Admiral Stepik in Tactical Division. "That business in Bahia was well done, Captain," Stepik said.
"Thank you, sir."
"You managed to avoid action this time, though. What happened?" Stepik asked through a smile.
"Right place, wrong time, sir. Or wrong place, right time. A little of both, I think."
"Well, it was well done, Captain. And you got a chance to work with multiple squadrons in setting up a defensive patrol plan. You and Admiral Shi shut down the incursions into Bahia entirely, and she was not shy in her reports about the role you played there. Now, though, something has come up. Have you heard about what happened in Waldheim?"
"Yes, sir. We lost 2 cruisers and 2 destroyers, the Gujarat, the Kansai, the Brunau, and the Maryville."
"And the 2,400 spicers aboard them. That's correct, Captain. They suckered our people into chasing a destroyer, then popped 2 heavies out of hyper and punched them out. We haven't worked up the Waldheim squadrons on the fleet book yet. There's just so much to do, and it can only get done so fast. We've been rotating people who are up to speed into the more vulnerable or threatened systems, and we just didn't see this coming."
"Do we know who it was, sir?"
"Yes. They got good telemetry on the destroyer when she spaced right past one of the new sensor drones. It was Firem."
"Firem? They've been a lot of trouble to their neighbors, sir, but am I wrong that they haven't been a problem for us before?"
"No, that's right, and that's why we didn't see it coming. And we can't let them get away with it. It gives other people the wrong idea. People have been tossing around what to do, and they've decided we need to send a force to Firem and teach them a lesson." Stepik noted Jan's startled expression and went on. "Yes, I know. Mostly we teach people a lesson by beating them up in our own space when they test us. We don't go outside the Commonwealth very often. Hire has determined, though, that we cannot let this pass. The Chief of Naval Operations, the Defense Minister, the Foreign Minister, and the Chairman of the Commonwealth Council have all signed off on a punitive expedition. On one condition, Captain."
"Sir?"
"That you command it."
"What?"
"You heard me, Captain. Your reputation has gotten around. They want you to lead a task force into Firem, see how many of their ships you can sucker into range, and punch out everything you can hit. If you took out half their navy, that would be fine with them. As long as it's you."
"That's pretty overwhelming, sir. That they specifically requested me."
"Do you think you can do it?"
"Oh, I can do it, sir. It's just overwhelming that those other people think I can do it."
"Well, they do. And they don't have the same level of confidence in anybody else. We are thinking something like a heavy cruiser squadron, maybe 3 divisions, with a division of light cruisers or destroyers, or some combination to use as bait. Depends on your operations plan. You can pretty much have whatever you want."
"I'll have to think about it, sir."
"Absolutely, Captain. You have the availability of the planning staff here. Some of the people who worked on ATS with you, for example. Actually, you can keelhaul just about anybody you want for this. Same with the ships, for that matter. You can hand-pick your ships and ship classes. Office space is being set up for you and whatever staff you need at the Naval Operations Center right now."
"Timeline, sir?"
"They want the message received loud and clear within 6 months of the Waldheim attack. You have up to 4 months until you need a space."
"I can make that timeline no problem, sir."
"So you accept the assignment?"
"Sir, I had friends on those ships."
"So did I, Captain. Oh, and speaking of which, there's one more thing you'll need to make this work."
"Sir?"
"A 2nd star. Congratulations, Rear Admiral Childers." Leaving Stepik's office, Jan stopped by the commissary, then headed over to Intelligence Division. One nice thing about being located at Sigurdsson, you could always pick up new shoulder patches and collar pins right away when you got promoted. Once in the Intelligence Division, she signed in and asked them to call Bill down for a visitor. It was a few minutes before he appeared from the elevator bank. He came up to her and saluted, which she returned. "Congratulations, Admiral Childers."
"Thank you, Captain."
"Come with me, if you would, ma'am." They went over to the elevators and down to one of the basements, where Bill led her into one of the secure conference rooms and closed the door. "All right, go ahead." You knew. Of course. I knew all about the Waldheim incident. I made the presentation to the CNO. It was recorded for the chairman, the foreign minister, and the defense minister. No, that's not what I'm talking about. You knew that they decided I was to be the expedition commander. Guilty as charged. I couldn't say anything. She looked at him for a long minute. He shrugged. Okay, I get that, Jan said. Jan collected her thoughts. How good is the idea on those ships being from Fire, Captain? The destroyer? 100%, ma'am. I reviewed the sensor data myself. The other ships, only by inference from the destroyer, but their sensor information was consistent with the specific outer colony design Fire uses. How good is our intelligence on Fire? Pretty good, actually, ma'am. We get regular commercial sensor data from the system. We're busy collecting everything you'll need right now. It's pretty complete, I think. We'll have more recent data coming in within a week or so. Make sure I have their planet leave and restocking rotation schedules, and how consistent they've been over, say, the past 2 years. I think we have that, ma'am, but I'll double check. Another thing I want is the sensor data checked going back 5 years looking for any surprises. Changes in readiness posture, ship rotations, modification to tactical exercises, anything that indicates they've recently changed how they would react to an incursion and what those changes might be. Yes, ma'am. Same thing with local news sources, Captain. Changes in commanders are particularly important because it would mean changes in their tactical responses, but anything over the past year that mentions their navies should be checked for anything pertinent. That we're doing now, ma'am. I also need complete dossiers, whatever we have on their flag officers. Background, education, battle experience, outcomes of those battles, their reputations, public statements, everything we have. Yes, ma'am. That should do it for now, Captain. I'm heading over to the NOC to meet my staff. Very good, ma'am. I'll escort you back to the lobby. Some effort had been made to make flag townhouses more secure than an unsecure space, but they were still only certified a Class 4 secure facility. Still, Bill and Jan could talk about some things at home. They were always scrupulous about being professional at the office, but were more relaxed at home even when discussing work. I only knew about your assignment a day or so before you did, honey, but I couldn't say anything. It had to go through channels, Bill said. I know, dear. I was just being testy. So you were assigned to this right off? Yeah, as soon as word came in. Good. So at least I can trust the intelligence work has been gone over properly. I think so. I wouldn't want to send you into harm's way without the best intel we can possibly give you, especially for an expedition outside the Commonwealth. I'm still surprised that Hire asked for me specifically. They didn't ask, hon. They required, or no expedition. Amazing. Not to me. Not after seeing you in command on Boudica. Whatever it is, you've got it. That magical thing in a commander who pulls all the pieces together, all the disparate skills. And they know it, and that's what they want. But it's all just common sense. Sense, yes. Common, not so much. Face it, Jan, you're special. Your people know you're special, both topside and below decks. Your superiors know you're special. I have more of an outside view than you do. You have one hell of a reputation. I suppose. I just hope I can deliver on this one. It's a big lift. You'll do fine. Just do what you do. Don't second-guess yourself. Staffing had to come first. Not everybody Jan would want was on Sigurdsson, and there would be spacing time to get there, plus the time in a fast courier just to send the recall notice. Of course, staffing without an operations plan was not easy either. She did know she would want at least 2 heavy cruiser squadrons that were already up on the fleet book. She set an NOC staffer to research possibles and propose candidates, and a division each of destroyers and light cruisers. She set another staffer to research those. And maybe a battleship division? Perhaps. She set a staffer to research those. She also set a couple of staffers to research what CSF knew about Firearms Navy, ships, doctrine, personnel. With that underway, she sat down and viewed with a critical eye the sensor logs from the encounter in Waldheim. It was hard to watch, knowing what was going to happen, but necessary. She watched it 3 times. They got suckered, all right. Of course, the most satisfying lesson to teach Firearm would be to sucker them as well, which they would be watching for. She started to play out scenarios in the simulator. The staff proposals on possible squadrons and divisions came in. Jan reviewed them and made her choices based on her knowledge of and relationship with the commanding officers of each. Local commanders could be expected to fight losing their best division to some wild hair project of somebody at Sigurdsson. Each recall message went out with an eyes-only message to the planetary commander that the squadron or division was being recalled to serve under Rear Admiral Jan Childers, and it had something to do with what was being called in the CSF the Waldheim Massacre. They could read between the lines, and rather than fight the recalls, broke all records getting the requested units underway. Most of the requested units accelerated at 1.2 Gs for the critical first 24 hours in hyperspace, and then kept it at 1.1 Gs the rest of the way. Even the battleships pulled their full 1.1 Gs the entire trip. On to Firem. The CSF for a long time had paid commercial ships spacing under Commonwealth flag to mount an extra box in their electronics bays. It recorded all their sensory inputs, continuously when not in hyperspace. No change was made to the sensors themselves, which would be detectable. It was simply a parasite recorder. Whenever the ship was within range of a CSF fleet base, the recorder downloaded information to the local base. That information was carried with dispatches on CSF fast courier ships back to Sigurdsson and catalogued. The result was Jan and her staff had over 30 years of sensor data on Firem, albeit from commercial sensors. Still, the Commonwealth had a large and profitable commercial shipping sector, and their sensors tended to be pretty good for commercial units. Poignantly, the most recent information catalogued at Sigurdsson showed the Firem ships departing to and returning from Waldheim. The Firem Navy was organized into 6 ship squadrons and 3 ship divisions. They had 6 squadrons, 2 each of destroyers, light cruisers, and heavy cruisers, for a total of 36 ships. Half the ships were in ready status at all times, on a 2-in-4 rotation. The patrolling units remained close to the planet to be able to respond in any direction to an incoming threat. They were expanding, and had 1 new light cruiser and 2 new heavy cruisers working up in addition to their official table of organization. Jan had requested a meeting with the CNO and his chief of staff. "Sir, we can limit the damage to no more than half their navy if we attack them when half their ships are on rotation, restocking in orbit, and with significant portions of their crews on planet leave. They would only be in a position to respond with the patrolling half. If we hit them during the period when one half of their force is relieving the other, all their ships would be available for response, and we could potentially goad them into committing more than half their navy. We could potentially wipe their navy out completely. For planning purposes, it makes a difference how we design the operation if we are trying to get them to commit up to half their navy or more than half their navy. What I need to know from you, sir, is do you want us to go for the biggest hit we can, or is taking out a significant portion of half their navy enough? But you might not, correct? I mean, you can't be sure how many of their forces you can get them to commit. They may commit only half their available in any case." "That's true, sir." "The point is to teach a lesson to all the outer colonies. It's got to be big enough to do that." "Yes, sir." "Hit them as hard as you can. See what you get." "Yes, sir." As it unfolded, Intelligence Division suggested that Captain Campbell go along on the expedition, serving as intelligence chief. Jan and Bill talked about it at home. "Jan, my big question is, will I be in your way? Will it change the way you make decisions to know I'm in the trenches with you?" "I don't think so. It would be a big comfort in one way. The way the operations plan is coming together, the initial incursion will confirm their operational profile is still what we expect it to be. I don't want everyone to go ahead on a blown-up if the enemy figured we were coming and changed things around to be difficult. Given your involvement in pulling the intel together, if I had your assessment that their profile hadn't changed, I could trust going ahead with the op. Otherwise, we bug out. That's not as good as being able to go ahead successfully, but it's a hell of a lot better than getting a bunch of our people killed. And I'm going to need that assessment pretty quickly. In minutes, not hours." "Okay. If I can be of help, I'm all in. You know that. I just don't want to be a distraction." Once that decision was made, Intelligence Division went to work on the CSS Midwest, the light cruiser Jan would be flying her flag on. They installed an intelligence section 1 deck down from the bridge deck, which on a light cruiser was also the captain's deck. The Midwest ended up with an intelligence suite that would do credit to a battleship. The unusual step of using a light cruiser to carry her flag was a necessary part of the plan in Jan's view. The operations plan called for the Midwest to be part of the bait, to lure the Firemians to come out after the Commonwealth ships. But Jan also wanted to personally confirm the inner and outer system envelopes and to verify the system defensive posture was what they had planned on before she committed larger forces. With her and Bill on the Midwest, they could perform those two roles on one of the ships in the initial incursion. Without a flag deck, that also meant Jan would be commanding the entire task force of 32 ships from the Combat Information Center on the Midwest. She had picked the Midwest because her captain was Captain Bev Bhatia, who had been the senior tactical officer on board Hu-Ming Lee when Jan was its XO, and before that, assistant tactical officer aboard Niels Isaacson when Jan was its senior tactical officer. They understood each other and worked well together. Tactical Division couldn't be outdone by Intelligence Division, though, so they upgraded the Combat Information Center on the Midwest with new equipment as well. Hopefully all the new equipment worked as advertised, or she would have to scrub the mission. The installers knew that, though, and everybody wanted a piece of the Firemians, so they checked and double-checked everything. They were done prepping the Midwest a month before departure, and Bhatia used the opportunity to take the ship out and run it through its paces. Bhatia took the CIC position Jan would be using and had her XO command from the bridge. They took turns practicing sensor disguises with several other ships in the task force to rehearse their roles in the upcoming expedition. The actual spacing order for Operation Payback was Rear Admiral Richard Murdoch's Battleship Division, Rear Admiral Salvatore Heyerdahl's Heavy Cruiser Squadron, Rear Admiral Bouchon McReady's Heavy Cruiser Squadron, Senior Captain Natalie Rodriguez Light Cruiser Division, and Senior Captain Fred Wang's Destroyer Squadron. The 32 ships of the expedition took off in squadrons and divisions over a period of 2 weeks. The task force was carried on the books as a squadron to confuse any prying eyes at Sigurdsson. Jan's rank as a Rear Admiral would normally have her commanding a squadron anyway, so stray references to Admiral Childers' squadron working up were unlikely to be associated with the 32-ship task force by anyone not in the know. Jan and Bill went aboard the Midwest 2 days before departure. They took the guest quarters on the captain's deck. Bill also took an officer's cabin that had survived the installation of the intelligence suite to give him room for his things and a place to work where he was out of Jan's way. Jan had not been aboard an hour when her door buzzer sounded. It was Senior Chief Anton Kmechik, who had been part of Senior Chief Chin's cleanup crew on Boudica and was now the senior non-com on the Midwest. "Hi, Senior Chief. What can I do for you?"
Begging the Admiral's pardon, ma'am, but we were wondering if you would honor us by attending a little welcome aboard dinner in the Chief's mess this evening."
"An Admiral, Senior Chief? Are you sure?"
"Oh, yes, ma'am. The Midwest isn't going to let a little matter of rank, no offense, ma'am, get in the way of being with our own. And to that point, ma'am, if Admiral Campbell would like to attend as well, we would be honored."
"You're sure, Senior Chief?"
"We're all agreed, ma'am."
"Then we'd both be honored to attend, Senior Chief." "Thank you."
"We're going to be dinner guests in the goat locker?"
"Yep, it's a little tradition that's grown up somehow. Whenever I come on board ship, from my first deployment as a lieutenant right through senior captain, the chiefs have me for dinner the first night. You weren't on Boudica when I went aboard, so you weren't there that first night. Rank and medals don't seem to matter. I guess they think of me as one of their own. You know, local girl makes good." Having come aboard in uniform, they were changing into ship suits for dinner. Jan looked at Bill as he zipped up. "Lose all the patches. Nothing but the name tape. Oh, and in the goat locker, everybody's on a first-name basis. Us included." After dinner, on their way back to her cabin on the captain's deck, Bill made one comment on the evening. "And you wonder why the whole Navy would follow you straight into hell." The 32 ships of the unnumbered task force assembled in hyperspace at their appointed positions around Firem as the clock ticked down. All units reported ready well before the appointed time. Immediately upon transition to normal space, the sensor started feeding data into the intelligence suite on the Midwest. In addition, the Midwest sent out a coded signal to any Commonwealth commercial ships in the system, claiming to be a Commonwealth fleet base. The 3 commercial ships began downloading their sensor recordings. These would take some minutes to arrive, so Bill was working primarily from the Midwest's passive sensors. Then they caught a break. One Commonwealth commercial ship was outbound in their general direction, and its sensor download started hitting them only 15 minutes after the request went out. Having left orbit mere hours before, the data was fresh, and she had had her active sensors powered up for her departure. Assembling all the raw data into a system view is what the intelligence suite's computers was set up to do, and the system view took shape as he watched. He compared it to the scenarios they had planned for. It was dead on their most expected scenario. The enemy hadn't changed anything in their operations. 30 minutes after they made hyperspace transition, Bill pushed a comm stud on his panel. Childers. Campbell. Enemy profile is Alpha. Repeat, profile Alpha. Excellent. Childers out. From there on out, Bill was just along for the ride.
Hypertransition, sir. 4 contacts at 0 mark 90 on the planet, on the system periphery. They're powering up. I make it 2 heavy cruisers and 2 light cruisers, Commonwealth design.
So they decided to come calling, eh? Good. They've screwed up by the numbers. They came in when we were rotating patrols, so we have our full Navy available. We'll see how they like that, Admiral Sean Brady said.
Accelerating inbound now, sir. Acceleration 1.4 gravities.
Cancel rotation. Tell Vice Admiral Gearman to remain on station.
Yes, sir. Transmitting now.
All right, let's get us underway. Just the heavy cruisers and the light cruisers. Let's leave the destroyers behind.
Hypertransition, sir. 4 more contacts at 0 mark 90 on the planet. Powering up. I make it another 2 heavy cruisers and 2 light cruisers. They're coming in behind the first batch, sir.
Well, why would they come in like that? That's strange.
Sir, one of those heavy cruisers in the first batch, it sort of wavered. It looked like a light cruiser for a second.
Ah, that's it. This isn't a major incursion. I'll bet those are light cruisers and destroyers. Well, let's play along with the gag for now. Send those spacing orders.
Yes, sir.
Sir, both bogies just made 90-degree turns, sir. They're pouring on side vector, away from our approach angle. Well, we've got them running around a little bit. Heavy div 1 and light div 1 on bogey 1. Heavy div 2 and light div 2 on bogey 2.
Yes, sir. Transmitting now. Sir, those bogies are spiraling. They're going in wider and wider circles, one further in than the other. They're starting to spin out there, like they're on a search pattern.
What the hell?
What Jan's 2 initial detachments were doing, and they really were both 2 light cruisers and 2 destroyers, was collecting gravitation data on the inner and outer system envelopes. Jan was flying her flag on one of the light cruisers, the CSS Midwest, where she was personally comparing the data coming in to predicted values. Everything was on target. No anomalies to worry about.
Hypertransition, sir. 1 contact at 0 minus 90 on the planet, on the system periphery. I make it a single destroyer.
Ah, now it becomes clear. This is a little circus here. Run in some light cruisers and destroyers, have them pretend to be heavies and lights, run them around in circles, pose a credible threat to move us out of position, and then send the actual force in on the other side to hit the planet.
That destroyer should hyper out in a couple minutes.
Hypertransition, that destroyer just hypered out, sir.
See, what did I tell you? Message to Admiral Gearman.
Recording, sir.
Message begins. John, this looks like a feint to get us out of position, but they didn't know you weren't out of commission with restocking and planet leave yet. I think the main force is going to be coming in from 0 minus 90. Go get them. Oh, and they're playing some razzle-dazzle with ships pretending to be bigger than they are. We saw a heavy leak through as a light. Just so you know. Brady out. Message ends. Send it.
Transmitting, sir.
Ma'am, that other force just got underway. 6 heavy cruisers and 6 light cruisers heading for 0 minus 090 on the planet.
Perfect,
Jan said. Hypertransition, sir. 4 contacts at 45 minus 60 on the planet on the system periphery. I make it 4 heavy cruisers, powering up. They're accelerating for the planet, sir. Coming up to 1.4 gravities. Keep an eye on them, Majors. See if you spot any irregularities. Admiral Brady says he caught lighter units pretending to be heavier ships, Gearman said.
Yes, sir.
Any course changes, sir? No. Stay on 0 minus 90. It doesn't make any sense for them to come in over there, other than to draw us off vectors so their main force can come in behind us. Yes, sir.
They're maintaining 0-090, ma'am.
Good, Jan said. She was watching the velocities and vectors. Stand by to run for it. Yes, ma'am.
Sir, a couple of those heavy cruiser signatures are wavering. They look like they're actually destroyers. He looked at his display again. Confirmed, sir. One leaked through real bad there. Ha! Gotcha. Keep going for 0-90. That's where they're coming in. Yes, sir.
All right, execute runaway, Jan said. Execute runaway. Yes, ma'am.
They're turning, sir. They've dropped the disguise. Piling on vector. Looks like they're making for the system periphery, both bogies.
Are we going to catch them?
Yes, sir. I think they've botched the timing. We had too much velocity advantage because they were running around parallel to the system periphery.
Stay on them.
Yes, sir.
Jan's formation, the earliest into the system, was running at their full acceleration of 1.7 gravities now, as the firemen's ships came racing up behind them. They had crossed over into the outer envelope and could hyper-transition at any time. Has Force 1 crossed into the outer envelope yet? Jan asked.
10 minutes yet, ma'am.
And Force 2?
22 minutes.
Time for Force 1 to range on us.
18 minutes.
Come, tell Ursuline 14 minutes.
14 minutes, yes, ma'am.
18 minutes, sir. They're not going to make it out.
Stand by guns. As soon as they're in range, open fire.
The 12 ships of Admiral Brady's force had spread out a bit into 2 groups of 6 as they pursued the 2 separate CSF forces. They were gaining on them, and with 3 heavy and 3 light cruisers per group, they had the CSF forces massively outgunned. It's been 14 minutes, ma'am. Execute Payback 1, red forward at 6 light seconds. Firing plan Gamma, full power to shields forward. Transmitting, ma'am.
Hyper transition, sir. One of those destroyers just hypered out.
What? Are they over the system periphery?
No, sir, but they hypered out.
That doesn't make any sense. If they could hyper out at any time, why are they hanging around?
The awful truth hit him.
Evasive maneuvers!
The 20 heavies of the CSF forces were arranged into 4 formations of 5 ships each, a battleship in the center, and 4 heavy cruisers on the corners of a square perpendicular to the long axes of the ships. Firing plan Gamma was for each ship to fire at ships of the next class down, battleships on heavy cruisers, and heavy cruisers on light cruisers. When the Ursuline transitioned into hyperspace, she transmitted tactical plots to 2 of these formations waiting in hyperspace. They moved into position and transitioned out of hyperspace into normal space. A 5-ship formation appeared directly in front of each of Admiral Brady's 6-ship formations at a distance of 6 light seconds. Each CSF battleship fired 2 beams into each of the 3 fireman heavy cruisers of the force in front of it, and each of the 4 CSF heavy cruisers fired a beam into each of the 3 fireman light cruisers in front of them. There was some return fire, but the CSF formation was out of range of the light cruisers' guns. The CSF formation did take some damage to shields from the fireman heavy cruisers' guns, but their shields held. With 2 battleship-grade beams per heavy cruiser and 4 heavy cruiser beams per light cruiser, the shields of the fireman formations did not. All 12 firemen ships broke up and exploded. The CSF ships transitioned into hyperspace, including the 2 smaller forces. Com, raise Admiral Murdoch. Murdoch here, Admiral Childers.
Payback 1 executed with no surprises. No changes to Payback 2. Execute Payback 2 on schedule.
Payback 2 on schedule. Yes, ma'am.
Childers out. As Admiral Gearman's forces crossed into the outer system envelope, they were still in a single formation, making for 0-90. The sensor information of Admiral Brady's forces being destroyed had not yet made it at light speed across the system.
Sir, those destroyers just hypered out. I guess they realized their ruse wasn't working. I hope they don't warn off the attack force.
Hyperspace transition. 10 contacts at 0 at 6 light seconds.
The gun's free. Fire at will.
It was too late. The beams of Admiral Murdoch's force were already on the way. Unprepared for action so far short of the system periphery, Admiral Gearman's force never got off a shot. All 12 of his ships were hit with the same fire as Admiral Brady's ships in Payback 1. All 12 broke up and exploded. Admiral Murdoch's force disappeared back into hyper. It was a hyperspace video conference to reduce time delays. All right, nice job everyone. Time to go home. You are all released back to your original formations and free to make your best speed back to them via whatever stops you need to make for restocking along the way. Tell all your people thank you and well done, Jan said. Do you want to move your flag aboard one of the battleships for the ride home, ma'am? Murdoch asked. No, I'm comfortable here on the Midwest. It's like old times, and I have friends aboard. We'll probably have a party tonight.
Bill had seen the whole portion of the operation dubbed Payback 1 from the premium seats, right in the middle of the action. He downloaded the sensor data from the ships of Payback 2 in hyperspace before the task force broke up into its constituent units for the trip home. When they were on their way home, Bill watched the entire operation play out in system view on the big display in the intelligence suite aboard the Midwest. He had not been privy to the operations plan prior to the action, having no need to know. Further, he could only see the operation as it played out, without all the alternatives and decision points and branches Jan had no doubt built into her overall plan. What left Bill stunned was the subtlety of it. How Jan had played into Firearm Admiral Brady's aggressive nature. How she had let the enemy see through the disguises of the initial incursions to keep Brady and Firearm Vice Admiral Gearman on the courses she wanted them to take. How she had timed the closing stages of Payback 1 to make Admiral Brady think he could catch the incursion force, to keep him coming on, and also to delay the denouement of Payback 1 so that Admiral Gearman would not see the defeat of Admiral Brady's force before his own defeat due to the speed of light transit time across the system. The understanding of human nature and of the specific firearm admirals involved. The ability to set up the timing of the operation and then manipulate that timing across system distances as events unfolded, and the precise allocation of ships in unconventional formations well in advance of the action convinced Bill he was watching the work of a master, an artist in the terrible medium of war. That night in their cabin, they talked about it. I correlated all the sensor data from all the ships involved in Operation Payback in the intelligence suite, and then watched the operation unfold in system view. Learn anything? Yes. You're very good at this. Jan, it's scary. It's like watching Michelangelo painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Jan laughed. No, really, I'm serious, Bill said. I think it's more like a symphony orchestra. You hear a single musical piece, but there are hundreds of people involved. You don't see the hours of practice it took to get that piece right, and the lifetime of skills each of the musicians brought to the production. It's not just the conductor. Without the musicians, the conductor can wave his baton all he wants. You won't hear a thing. Chapter 23. The Grand Tour. The news of the victory at Firearm beat the Midwest back to Sigurdsson by several days via a fast courier ship from one of the other squadrons that had stopped for restocking at a Commonwealth planet closer to Firearm. They received a thank you message from the defense minister addressed to the entire squadron while still en route to the planet. Jan read it to the crew over the Midwest's intercom. Jan's AAR had been prepared during the month-long trip, and it was transmitted to the planet en route, as was Bill's review of the action, which included the system view simulation of the entire operation from the intelligence suite computer. By the time they made Jablanka orbit, all the paperwork was done and filed. Vice Admiral Durand was in his early morning meeting with Admiral Birkin the day the Midwest was due in to Jablanka. He brought up Captain Campbell. Sir, we need to decide what's next for Captain Campbell. Well, that whole business with Firearm was nicely handled. Did you read Admiral Childers' AAR? Yes, sir. Did you think it was slanted with respect to Captain Campbell? I don't think so, sir. From what I can tell, that's not how she does business. The other thing is that the facts sort of speak for themselves. The intel on this op was spot on the money. That's not something we can say all that often. And it was Captain Campbell's project from start to stop. That's what I was thinking. So what do you have in mind? I spoke with Admiral Stepik yesterday, sir, to find out what he had in mind for Admiral Childers.
He'd like to send her out to a number of Commonwealth planets that they just haven't gotten on top of yet with teaching the fleet book. Avoid another wall time. He was thinking a 2-year tour. Hit half a dozen planets or so, train them up, then move on. The Grand Tour, eh? Ouch. Indeed, sir. Captain Campbell has his 12 years. I'd hate to lose him to half retirement if he decided he'd rather part with the Navy than part with her. They've logged with Housing Division as companions for more than 4 years. More like 5, actually.
You never bring me problems that you haven't at least thought about solutions for.
What are you thinking, Jake? Birkin asked.
One would be to ask Admiral Stepik to reconsider. The problem there is I think he's right. We got caught with our pants down in Waldheim, and we're just as or even more vulnerable in some of these other systems until they finish the rollout on the fleet book. And Admiral Childers is by far their best trainer. Anywhere she's given a free hand, defensive problems go away.
So that leaves sending Captain Campbell off on the grand tour with Admiral Childers. I can see the benefit of getting some trusted eyes on some of these other planets, review our operations there, get some reports back from a consistent point of view.
So can I, sir. The issue is rank. He's 2.5 years since promotion, so it's a little early, but we could promote him to senior captain based at least in part on his performance on the firearm business. But senior captain is still subordinate to the rear admiral we would typically have in a planet's intelligence headquarters. He might not be able to penetrate what's going on if a planetary commander wants to stymie him. And he's way out of the zone for rear admiral, which would still leave him junior to a rear admiral on his own station, Durand said.
I really like the idea, though. And if Captain Campbell is really destined for hire with an intelligence division, as you and I have discussed in the past, doing the grand tour and packing a whole lot of experience on different Commonwealth planets into a 2-year stint would be perfect. Give him the broad view.
Agreed, sir. There's still the rank issue. What about this, Jake? Make him senior captain, then put an inspector's badge on it, Birkin said.
I like it, sir. We don't do that very often. I didn't even think of it, but it's perfect. No command authority, but absolute authority to access any information and talk to anyone in the chain of command. It can be open to some abuse with the wrong person, but I don't think Captain Campbell fits that description. I don't either. All right, we're decided then. Promotion to Senior Captain Inspector, assigned to travel wherever Admiral Childers' duties take her.
General assignment is an assessment of Intelligence Division activities in whatever systems he finds himself in.
Yes, sir. And call Admiral Stepik and give him my regards. See if you can coordinate their interviews so Campbell and Childers get their orders the same day. Let's not get them fretting about it. I don't want Captain Campbell's thoughts going down that other channel. Yes, sir. I read your AAR. It was nicely done, Admiral, Admiral Stepik said. Thank you, sir. With 32 ships, 8 of them destroyers, you destroyed 24 cruisers at Firearm, with no losses on your own part.
They also lost their 2 senior field commanders and their staffs, and 24,000 spacers.
I took bigger ships, sir. Granted, it's still a good piece of work. The tactical division will be writing about it for years. Jan laughed, and Stepik went on. So what's Firearm got left now? 2 heavy cruisers and 1 light cruiser that we're working up, and 12 destroyers, sir.
Well, that should keep them out of trouble for a while. They had hoped to prove to their neighbors they weren't to be messed with because they could hit us with impunity. Now they and all the rest of the colony worlds know that's not the case.
His gaze drifted down toward decorations, a cluster to the CSF Combat Medal, another cluster to the Distinguished Service Medal, another star to the Victorious Action Ribbon, and a Theater of Service ribbon for Waldheim were all new.
Well, at least the Combat Medal doesn't look lopsided next to the Science Medal anymore, since they both have one cluster. And I thought it was a nice touch when fleet personnel insisted on the Waldheim Theater of Service ribbon.
Yes, sir, but I don't understand the DSM. I was just doing my job. Very few admirals fly their flag on a light cruiser and then use themselves as bait, Admiral Childers. But I had to verify the actual system envelopes matched up with the theoretical predictions, or my ships could have been in danger under the preferred operations plan, sir. So instead, you put yourself in danger. I see. So did the merit board. That's the point. I see, sir. Good. Now what do we do with you, eh? We don't have any more upstart outer colonies that need serious smacking this week. So what I had in mind was to give you a heavy cruiser squadron and have you go around to some problem planets and work them up per the fleet book. Problem planets, sir? Not problems with senior commanders, Admiral. Just planets we haven't gotten to yet who could use training and exercises. The senior commanders are begging for help. It's been almost 3 years since the Fleet Book of Maneuvers was approved, and they're at sea out there. We just can't rotate staff through training fast enough. So I thought we could have you go out to a planet for, 2 months, 3 months, and get them up to speed. You can take training staff from here, so you're not bearing the brunt of the training. You would be the one to play the Op Force commander, but, using the published system periphery, so when they beat you, they know they can beat any outer colony navy out there. Basically what you did in Bahia with Admiral Shi, but then once you're satisfied, you move on to the next one.
That sounds like fun, actually, sir.
Jan and Bill both had their interviews on the same morning, about a week after they returned from Firem. Jan got back to the townhouse first, with orders for a 2-year roving assignment. She had to admit it was a tremendous assignment. Go into a system, assess what they had, train everybody up, get everything running smoothly, and then move on. No boring patrols, no routine duties. But it would be a personal disaster. How could she and Bill deal with this? With travel times of 3 to 5 weeks, there was no such thing as popping back to Sigurdsson for a visit. It meant 2 years apart no matter what assignment Intelligence Division gave him, or where.
Bill might just up and quit the Navy. She didn't want that either. He had his 12 years, but he also enjoyed what he did. More, he was good at it. He had nailed the intel on Firem right down the line.
She saw no good way out. Her thoughts were spiraling down this path when Bill got home. He had been delayed by a stop through the commissary. Hi, Han.
Hi. Boy, you sound cheerful.
Cheerful doesn't capture it. First, check these.
Bill pointed to his shoulder patches, now with the 1 star of a senior captain.
Nice. Stars look good on you.
And now, this.
Bill pointed to a new badge, a specialty badge. Intelligence Division didn't go in much for specialty badges, but they made an exception for Inspector. Wow. Senior Captain Inspector Intelligence Division? You can make anybody bend and spread 'em.
Yeah. But Jan, that's not the best part. Read this. Bill pulled a folded sheaf of papers out of his inner jacket pocket and handed them to her. It was a standard orders form. Roving inspection of Intelligence Division assets on such planets as you may deem appropriate? That's pretty open, Jan said. Yep. Now read the last page. Jan turned to the last page, and the downward spiral of her emotions turned around and went straight to orbit. Transport date open means Rear Admiral Childers' flagship TBD. Oh, Bill! She jumped out of her chair and threw her arms around him. There would be no separation. I thought somebody up there liked me. Now I'm sure of it, Bill said. Jan stood on tiptoe and kissed him. They don't want you even thinking about half retirement. That's why the interviews were the same day. I think they coordinated them, Jan said. Intelligence Division and Tactical Division? Working together? Nah, couldn't be. Isn't that against regulations? Jan laughed.
The laugh came easily.
Think about it. We've never had our assignment interviews the same day before, and we've always had to finagle your assignments to match mine. Not this time. The finagling moved upstairs.
Well, however it works, I like it.
Me too, hon. Me too.
As ships were collecting for the squadron,
the new build CSS Patrick Mazer was released from her space trials and assigned to the squadron. Jan made Patrick Mazer her flagship, and requested and got Captain Bev Bhatia for her flag captain. Bhatia had been out of the zone for captain on the Midwest, and she needed a heavy ship command to move up to senior captain. Flag captain of a heavy cruiser squadron for a 2-year deployment was icing on the cake. Bhatia brought some of her staff over from the Midwest,
and she and Jan worked on personnel to fill in other slots on the Patrick Mazer and throughout the squadron. They paid particular attention to ship's captains, executive officers, and senior tactical officers on the other ships, as well as handpicking the entire tactical department for the Patrick Mazer.
Jan also picked teaching staff from the training department of the tactical division at Sigurdsson, who would all go along on the deployment for the classroom training aspect. For the exercises, Jan's squadron would form the op force. Jan did most of this work from the planet, while Bhatia was on Patrick Mazer.
They had established such a rapport on the Niels Isaacson and Hu-Ming Lee, reinforced by the recent fire operation, that this worked for them where it might not work for others. Bhatia did take the Patrick Maser out of the system for 2 weeks during the 2-month period Jan spent organizing the squadron. She didn't feel comfortable spacing in a new-build ship without wringing her out a little, and Jan didn't blame her. They practiced hyperspace transitions, ran the drive up to 100% for a 12-hour period while her crew coped with the constant 1.4G, and exercised other ship systems to try to work out the infant mortality on everything they could. With 2 weeks left to go for departure, Jan and Bill moved aboard into the Admiral's cabin on the flag deck. As usual, Bill also took a guest quarters down the hall to have a private workspace. Within an hour of moving aboard, with Bill down the hall moving in his things, Jan's door buzzer sounded. It was Senior Chief Kmechik. "Senior Chief, we meet again." "Yes, ma'am. The captain brought me across from the Midwest." "Well, then I know the ship will be in good hands." "Yes, ma'am. I hope so. We've got some green wood aboard, but we'll get them shipshape on the quick." "Admiral, ma'am, we were wondering if you would do us the honor of joining us for a little welcome aboard dinner in the Chief's mess this evening. You and Admiral Campbell both, ma'am." "We'd be delighted to, Senior Chief. We wouldn't miss it for the world." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." Over the next 2 years, the squadron made port in Waldheim, Courtney, Natchez, Maley, Bliss, Hutan, Mountain Home, and Shanti. The Sigurdsson training team taught classes on the fleet book, after which Jan's squadron put them through their paces until they could perform maneuvers with their eyes closed. At that point, they moved on. The first 2 to 3 weeks in a new location, Jan's squadron would patrol to cover the system while the command crews of the ships on station were in training. They split, with one division on the northern approaches and one on the southern. Once the classroom portion was done, the divisions of the squadron went to a 2-in-4 rotation for planet leave and restocking. After 4 weeks of exercises, the squadron took another 2 weeks of planet leave before moving on. The first 2 weeks of exercises, Jan left to her second-in-command of the squadron, Senior Captain Brian Dahl aboard the CSS Donald McNee with her 2nd Division. Jan took the second 2 weeks with her 1st Division. Bill moved down to the planet on the squadron's arrival, presented his credentials to the Intelligence Division commander on each planet, and then started digging into what they were doing and how and why. They knew he was coming, and there were never issues with his authority, but people were nervous. His relaxed attitude and just routine, no worries approach put people at ease, but it didn't keep him from being thorough. The result was that Jan and Bill had a month together on board during crossings, and then planet leave visits in the 3rd, 4th, 7th, and 8th weeks in each system. And then they moved. After 2 years and 8 systems, the Patrick Maser and her consorts headed home to Sigurdsson. Chapter 24. Commanding Officer of Task Force 32. Vice Admiral Durand and Admiral Birkin were having their early morning meeting. "Did you see Captain Campbell's report on Shanti?" Durand asked. "Yes. It looks like we need to replace another planetary intelligence commander." "What is that now, 4? Birkin asked. "No, just 3. In Natchez and Bliss, we replaced the intelligence commander based on his earlier reports." "Retirement, wasn't it?" "Yes, sir." "Well, I guess it's good to know where the problems are. Or were, rather. Also nice to know the other 5 were doing pretty well, all things considered," Birkin said. "Yes, and in a couple of those we'd arranged follow-up visits to help them clean up minor things. So we've tightened up a lot on those planets. Good work all around." "Jake, what makes me think you're building up to something?" "Because you know me so well, sir. We need to consider what Captain Campbell does now." "What's the one thing he doesn't have?" Durand asked. "Planetary intelligence responsibility." "Exactly what I was thinking, sir. So I got in touch with Admiral Stepik to see what we could work out. I figured we might coordinate in advance. The Grand Tour worked out really well for them, too, and he figures he owes Admiral Childers one. What he wants for her next is planetary responsibility on the tactical side. Command the task force assigned to system defense. And she's getting her 3rd star." "That could work out well with Campbell if we could agree on a planet," Birkin said. "Exactly, sir." "What planet did you come up with?" "Kodu, sir. Stepik wants to rotate Vice Admiral Deshpande out. He's been there 2 years," Durand said. "Isn't Rear Admiral Gorski the intelligence commander there? I thought he was doing a good job." "Oh, he is, sir. But he's also a bit over 2 years from retirement, and Shanti is his homeworld." "Ah, now I see the shape of your devious plans. Admiral Childers rotates out Deshpande, Captain Campbell rotates out Admiral Gorski, and we put Gorski, who's a seasoned hand, on Shanti to clean things up, which he will absolutely love because he can retire in place when he punches his ticket for 24.
Yes, sir. And Admiral Stepik is good with this? Yes, sir. And we give Captain Campbell his second star. Yes, sir. It's a Rear Admiral's berth. It's a little early, but he did a great job for us on the Grand Tour, and it gave him a planetary view. 8 of them, in fact, Durand said. Which is where we started. All right, I'm good with all of this.
Let's see if we can't coordinate with Tactical Division again. Get them their orders the same day.
Yes, sir. 8 planets in 2 years, Admiral. That's a quarter of the Commonwealth. Outstanding, Admiral Stepik said.
Thank you, sir. I enjoyed it.
And in the process, you got to meet a lot of the other senior field commanders and their staffs.
You probably know as many people in the CSF at this point as I do. Jan laughed. Oh, somehow I doubt that, sir. Well, close. Anyway, it was well done. We've finally gotten out in front of fully implementing the Fleet Book of Maneuvers across the service. It's taken us almost 5 years, but we're finally buttoned up on it. And outer colony navies, for the most part, are leaving us alone. For the most part, sir? Well, I do have a system I'm worried about. Kodu is a commercial powerhouse in the Commonwealth.
Some of its outer colony neighbors don't appreciate that.
Their diplomats have been screaming about it.
And the foreign minister basically shrugged his shoulders. I think they may be getting upset enough somebody might try to pull something out there. You're up for promotion, Admiral, and I have hires screaming at me to do it. You already commanded a task force with 4 squadrons in the Firearm situation, so I was thinking promotion to Vice Admiral, commanding Task Force 32, stationed on Kodu. What do you think?
After their respective interviews, Jan and Bill ran into each other in the commissary. They were both buying extra stars. Okay, this is getting ridiculous, Bill said. I told you they were coordinating. Betcha I can tell you what planet your orders are too, and on what ship, and for how long. Well, go for it. Kodu on CSS Zenobia for 2 years, Jan said. Got it in 1. Well, we can save a couple credits. How's that? Jan pulled off her 2-star shoulder badges and handed them to Bill. We don't need to buy new ones of these, unless you'd rather have new ones. Actually, I'm fine with wearing these. You wore them at Firearm. They're good luck. Jan settled into building up her battleship squadron for Kodu. The rest of Task Force 32 was already on station, but she would bring a new battleship squadron to rotate out Admiral Deshpande's, which had been there 2 years. She let Rear Admiral Sven McAllen, who had been captain of the Ika Ika Kalani on Pahadan, take her 2nd Division, and she let him have Senior Captain Bev Bhatia as his flag captain aboard the Genghis Khan. She took Senior Captain Zhu Wanmoon, who had been tactical officer of one of Alice Cheng's cruisers on Calumet, as her flag captain on board Zenobia. None of the ships in her squadron were new build, and sorting everything out only took a month. A week before departure, Jan and Bill moved her flag aboard Zenobia. Bill also took a cabin down the hall on the Admiral's deck, as had become their custom. Also, as per custom, her door buzzer sounded within an hour of coming aboard. It was Senior Chief Angus Doherty, who had also been one of Senior Chief Chin's cleanup crew on Boudica. Hi, Senior Chief. Good morning, Admiral. Ma'am, we'd like to invite you to honor us with your attendance at a little welcome aboard party in the Chief's mess tonight. You and Admiral Campbell both, ma'am. A Vice Admiral, Senior Chief? In the goat locker? You know that don't make no difference to us, ma'am. Yes, Senior Chief, I do. We'd be delighted to attend. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. The crossing to Kodu was without incident. After a month of integration of her battleship squadron into the task force and readiness exercises with all 40 ships, the task force went to 2 and 4 rotations. Jan and Bill settled into their routine on such deployments, with her spending planet leave with Bill in a furnished flag townhouse on Kodu Fleet Base. Jan's 40 ships were her battleship squadron, comprised of 1 division each of Cleopatra-class and Alexander-class battleships, a squadron of heavy cruisers, a squadron of light cruisers, and a flotilla of destroyers.
It was in the 18th month of their deployment to Kodu that Jan handed Bill a sheaf of papers one evening at home. "Hon, could you look these over quickly and let me know what you think?" "Sure, Jan." Bill scanned through the papers while Jan said nothing. "You have got to be kidding me," Bill said. "That's what I said.
First thing I asked for was a clarification. I basically got back a "you have your orders" message.
I've been worried since Graham took over from Leahy as C&O. This makes those worries more than justified. Jan's orders were to prepare for fleet exercises against visiting Task Force 41 under Vice Admiral Salvatore Heyerdahl in 3 months.
Observers would be sent out from Sigurdsson. The exercises were to take place around the moon, Kodu 5A. Bill looked at the orders again. Do they know that Kodu 5 is near opposition to Kodu at the moment? They apparently don't care. What are you going to do? Bill asked. Yeah, what can I do? I already filed a formal objection to the orders on the basis that I can't possibly protect the planet when I'm on the other side of the system. Want to bet I don't get a pro forma response that says do it anyway because we said so? No, never bet against stupidity, especially in the Navy. Apparently they think their security is so tight that I can get to the other side of the system,
participate in this exercise, and then be back on station before anybody notices,
Jan said. Before anybody notices? Paradiso and Willem and God knows who else probably knew about this before you did. I can't believe Durand would stand for this.
He knows there are foreign agents active at Sigurdsson.
We've tried to root them out, but we can never get them all. But Intelligence Division isn't under the CNO. He's got Tactical Division, Supply Division, Planetary Division, Personnel Division, Legal Division, all the combat and combat support groups. But Intelligence Division, Science Division, Propulsion Division, Shipbuilding Division, Weapons Division are all under the Chief of Naval Research. And this is an operations issue.
I don't think Durand has a say.
So what are you going to do? Bill asked. Plan as best I can for this foreseeable incursion. What else can I do? Jan and Bill saw less of each other over the next 3 months, as Jan crammed as much operations planning as she could into the time she had. If there was an incursion, it was going to get ugly. She dug back into the hyperspace mathematics, made loss estimates, designed a custom book of maneuvers for the likely incursions. She did everything she could and came to one inescapable conclusion. This was going to hurt. Vice Admiral Jan Childers, commanding Task Force 32, watched the preparations for the naval exercises from her flag bridge on the Cleopatra-class battleship CSS Zenobia.
Her task force was Red Navy,
while Task Force 41, under the command of Vice Admiral Salvatore Heyerdahl on CSS Tomoe, was Blue Navy. Sammy's job was to defend the planet, while Jan's job was to attack the planet and reduce its orbital infrastructure with minimal losses to her own force. The planet they were practicing on was an uninhabited moon circling a gas giant, and that was the problem that made Jan's skin crawl. The gas giant, locally known as Apollo but officially designated Kodu 5, was currently on the other side of the system from the Commonwealth planet she had been posted to for almost the last 2 years. Kodu.
She had protested the naval exercises taking her too far out of position to protect the planet, but the new Navy brass thought it was a good idea to give the exercises what they called breathing room. Besides, the thinking went, no one would know the planet was uncovered until she was back on station anyway.
Famous last words, Jan thought, as she watched her 16 heavy and 24 light combatants work up. Why in the world the Navy brass thought their information security was so tight as to put a Commonwealth planet at risk for a set of exercises was incomprehensible to Jan. She had thought of leaving half her heavies and some light units around Kodu, but there were observers here for the exercise who would count ships and come up short. There was some planning she could do, and she had done it. Whether it would work was another question. Approaching hypertransition now, sir, Commander Adrian DeVries said. All right. Remember, first priority is to make sure those heavies are where we think they are.
No sense sticking our toes in the water until we know where the sharks are,
Admiral Peter Sebastian said. Yes, sir,
DeVries said.
Transitioning now. Transition complete. Sensors acquiring.
Where are they? Where are they? Where are they?
Sebastian muttered. Confirmed, sir. Approximately 80 warships in orbit about Kodu 5. Energy levels indicate roughly 30 heavies and 50 light units.
Excellent. Just like we planned it.
Sebastian had 12 ships, 4 heavy cruisers, including his flagship PSS Tiger, 4 light cruisers, and 4 destroyers. His force was designated Second Fleet. It was a huge fleet by Paradiso standards, nearly half their available units, but the payoff would be worth it. Kodu dominated the shipping and transshipping business in the sector. Paradiso business interests couldn't compete.
Now, if some mischance were to befall Kodu's orbital infrastructure, like getting blown out of space by Sebastian's fleet, for example, that would cease to be the case. The icing on the cake was when they found out the CSF's incoming brass had scheduled fleet exercises that would take the task force protecting Kodu way out of position. CSF wasn't to be messed with, but this was too good an opportunity to pass up. Okay, let's get underway. Navigation Plan Alpha. Status change. Ma'am, 12-point sources just made hypertransition on the published system periphery below the ecliptic. 0-090 on the planet, ma'am. Commander Ted Nguyen said. Right where she would have done it, Jan thought. Directly below the planet where the flattened sphere of the system periphery was closest. It would also allow them to fly vertically past the planet and exit the system at 0-090 without bringing them anywhere near Jan's or Heyerdahl's forces. They're warships, ma'am. Power levels indicate 4 each, heavy cruisers, light cruisers, and destroyers. Outer colony design, no transponders, no IDs. Probably either Paradiso or Willem. They were the ones screaming the most about Kodu's trade policies. Com, record for transmission to TF-32. Recording, ma'am. Message begins. Fleet orders. All units, case blue, case blue, case blue. This is not a drill. Navigation plan blue 3. Departure 15 minutes. Acknowledge readiness. Message ends. Send it, Com. Yes, ma'am. Lieutenant Freddie McIntosh said. Now to see if she had planned well enough. Sammy, I'm going to see if I can't catch them before they can get to the planet. Why don't you see if you can position yourself to pick off any that make it to the other side of the system periphery? I'll do that, Jan, but there's no way you can catch them. You've got to get halfway around the system first, and they'll be well within the inner envelope by the time you can get there. You'll be behind them all the way in. Your battleships won't be able to even keep up with them, much less catch them. They're just too slow. Well, we'll keep them running in your direction at least. Happy hunting. Childers out. And you, Jan. Heyerdahl out. General quarters alarms were sounding all over TF-32 as the exercises were forgotten. Spacing orders for the heavies and the light cruisers were to make for the closest point of approach of the lower system periphery, approximately 160-095 on the sun. They would hyper around the system periphery to 0-090 on the planet, where the bogies had transitioned. But then it would get interesting. The destroyers would make for the planet at their best speed to provide defense against any follow-up attacks. They were fast enough, a great arc over the sun was their best route. Half would come in hot on the planet and provide earlier defense in passing, but overfly the planet. The other half would decelerate on the second half of the trip to take station on the planet, to be rejoined by their mates when they made their way back. Her flag captain, Senior Captain Ju Wan Moon, calmed her as the fleet shook out. These spacing orders, ma'am? Are these for real? You bet, Captain. Our job is to protect the planet. I don't see any other way to do it. Isn't this a little dangerous, ma'am? No, it's a lot dangerous, but it's our only option given the situation. I will take up the unenviable position in which we find ourselves with Navy brass, if we survive, that is, at a later time. But right now, it's all we've got, other than to sit here and watch the destruction of Kodu's infrastructure and thereby its economy. Yes, ma'am. That would bother me even more than attempting this, I think. That's the spirit. When Task Force 32 spaced for Kodu 5, Bill had started living in the Intelligence Division headquarters on Kodu Fleet Base. It was close to the Planetary Combat Information Center, and he spent a lot of time over there. He was in the planetary CIC when Paradiso's Second Fleet popped out of hyperspace at 0-090 on the planet. It was less than 30 minutes before Task Forces 32 and 41 responded, Task Force 32 spacing for the system periphery on the south, and Task Force 41 spacing north. Bill looked at his watch. He knew it would be hours before they got to the system periphery. He went back over to the intelligence building and took a nap. It took him a while to fall asleep. After a couple hours of sleep and some food in the mess, Bill was back in the planetary CIC. Task Force 32 must be approaching the outer system envelope now. He knew what Jan was going to do. She hadn't discussed it with him, but he knew all of her options were bad. And he knew which one she would pick. That she had peeled off her destroyers in the very first moments of her response proved it. Oh, let this go well. Please let this go well, Bill thought. TF-32 made its best speed to the system periphery on one side of the system, as Second Fleet continued to accelerate toward Kodu on the other.
When the ships of TF-32 reached the outer envelope, they hyper-transitioned out of normal space.
Bogey 1 has hypered out downside, sir. Bogey 2 is running for a hypertransition topside. Bogey 3 is coming for the planet over the sun. By their energy profiles and acceleration rates, I make Bogey 3 to be destroyers, DeVries said.
All hopeless gestures. We'll be done and gone before they can catch us. Maintain profile,
Sebastian said. TF-32 maneuvered across the inner envelope of the system periphery to a position directly astern of Bogey 1, and turned toward the enemy. They continued their pursuit of Bogey 1, following right up her wake. They passed the hard system periphery without transitioning from hyperspace.
Com, record message.
Recording, ma'am.
Message begins. Fleet orders. Modulation override Epsilon 7. Fire plan Gamma immediately on transition from hyper. Guns free. Fire at will. Message ends. Send it.
Message sent, ma'am. TF-32 made a crash transition into normal space from hyper within the hard system periphery, which was bad. They also carried a lot of velocity over into normal space, which was also bad. They were still well clear of the ecliptic, which was good. And modulation Epsilon 7 was Jan's personal best shot at maximizing their chances on the down transition. There. Jan's ship disappeared into hyperspace. Bill started watching the Paradiso Second Fleet as it continued to approach Kodu. Several minutes passed. A few more. The 24 battleships and cruisers of Task Force 32 reappeared in normal space directly behind Paradiso's Second Fleet. In the first few moments, a third of Task Force 32 simply disappeared from the plot.
On transition, the heavy cruisers CSS Willard Dempsey and CSS Manfred Koch broke up and exploded, along with the light cruisers CSS Provence, CSS Schwarzwald, and CSS Szechuan. All the stouter battleships survived, but the older Alexander-class battleships CSS Julius Caesar, CSS Napoleon Bonaparte, and CSS Genghis Khan suffered major engineering failures that left them without propulsion or weapon systems. There were multiple minor engineering failures, personnel injuries, and more than a few deaths throughout the remaining 5 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, and 5 light cruisers of TF-32.
Well, that's why you're not supposed to do that, Jan thought. Fat lot of choice we had.
TF-32 emerged from hyper directly behind Paradiso's Second Fleet with overtake velocity, and well within the firing range of even the light cruisers. The remaining operational ships of TF-32 opened fire. Fire Plan Gamma had each ship firing only at ships one step below its weight, punching down, so to speak, and not firing on any other ship until all those were gone. Target priority among those was the enemy ship closest, and working out from there.
Status change, hypertransition, multiple point sources, 180 Mark 0, distance 2 light seconds.
What? Fleet orders, hard to port!
But the first salvos from TF-32 were already on the way. Because of Fire Plan Gamma, each of the 12 Paradiso ships was fired upon and hit by at least one of the 16 remaining effectives of TF-32. Battleships fired on heavy cruisers fired on light cruisers, and light cruisers fired on destroyers. With the guns of Second Fleet all trained forward toward the planet and forward shields energized, there was no return fire and no aft shields to attenuate or deflect the incoming fire. 3 salvos were enough to destroy Second Fleet, 1/2 of Paradiso's navy. Kodu itself suffered no damage, as Second Fleet had not gotten within firing range of the planet or its infrastructure. Aboard Zenobia, Jan gave fleet orders to begin emergency rescue operations on Napoleon Bonaparte, Genghis Khan, and Julius Caesar, which had lost power in the transition to normal space. The ships would drift on, and assessment and recovery crews could go out and retrieve them later. First priority was to get the personnel off before anything else let go on one of those ships, and she took her crew with her. Then she took a second to trigger the transmission of a pre-programmed message. Bill was watching the plot with his heart in his throat when his phone alerted. There was a one-line message. "I'm okay. Busy. Later. JC." He started to breathe again.
Hi, Erdal.
Hi, Sammy. Childers.
Jan, are you okay?
I'm fine. Most of us are fine. We lost 5 ships, and we have 3 battleships adrift that we're evacuating now. The rest of us are pretty beat up. All our ships have systems down or failing all over.
What can I do to help?
I think we can hold ourselves together and get to Kodu on our own. Sammy, I need you to cover the planet. Somewhere back there, we stopped being an effective defensive force.
But you were there when it counted, Jan. I still can't believe you pulled it off. You got them before they overflew the planet.
We got him, Sammy, but it cost us. I hope the ghosts of the dead rest easy knowing we accomplished our mission.
We'll cover Kodu, Jan. Get the rest of your people home and out of those ships before something lets go.
Thanks, Sammy. Childers out.
It was hours before the surviving ships of Task Force 32 got everyone off the 3 drifting battleships. Hours more before the surviving ships got their own damage patched up enough to limp back to the planet. Stable orbits were established, station keeping was set on the computers, and Jan gave orders to begin evacuating the surviving ships of Task Force 32. Bill was talking to his staff in the Intelligence Division headquarters.
We've had a major fleet engagement in this system in which Commonwealth ships were lost. There will be a board of inquiry. Our job is to secure all the evidence. I want forensic copies of every ship's computer systems, the computer systems and message accounts of every flag rank officer on Kodu Fleet Base, the communications log of Kodu Fleet Base, and the plotting system in planetary CIC. We need to make sure the Board of Inquiry has all the evidence related to this event so they can undertake an informed investigation. Remember, no is not an acceptable answer. Under Section 1702 of Navy Regulations, we have the authority to demand all these items. I have already spoken to the commanding officer of the MPs on base, and he concurs. He's prepared to lock people up if he has to keep them out of your way. So if you get any pushback, let me know, or contact him directly. Get to it. As crammed shuttles ferried crews down to Kodu Fleet Base, they came back up with small forensic teams. Bill accompanied one of the teams up to orbit, the one going to Zenobia.
Jan was on the flag bridge of Zenobia, overseeing the evacuation of Task Force 32 when Bill walked onto the flag bridge. Admiral Childers, Bill said.
Admiral Campbell.
We're pulling forensic copies of all ships' plotting, navigation, and combat systems for the Board of Inquiry.
Excellent, Admiral. You won't get any pushback here. I'll issue fleet orders clearing your way.
I would appreciate that, Admiral. Jan transmitted the orders, then turned to Bill.
If you would accompany me, please, Admiral, Jan said.
They went to Jan's office adjoining her cabin. When they got inside, with the door closed, Bill held her. Are you okay, hon? Bill asked.
I'm uninjured, I'm really pissed, and I'm depressed as hell. Those bastards at Sigurdsson set me up so all my options were bad. We lost over 5,000 people, Bill. 5,000 people, because Graham and his staff are too stupid to pour piss out of a boot.
I know. That's one reason I'm making sure we're sweeping widely enough with our evidence collection. I also sent an encrypted message directly to Admiral Durand. They'll be doing the same thing at Sigurdsson. Those guys are going to try to make it someone else's fault, you know, and you're the logical target.
I know. This may be the end of the road for me, Bill. If this sort of thing happens again, if I get that kind of orders again, that's stupid. I'm going to tell them to shove them right up their ass. Maybe it's better to just leave now, under my own steam. But I won't ever let my people be slaughtered because someone else's stupidity again. I've got my 18 in. 3/4 retirement. That's looking pretty good right now.
Well, let's just see what happens. You're going to be grounded until the Board of Inquiry publishes their findings anyway. That's likely to take a year. Then you can decide what you want to do.
Fair enough.
Jan heaved a huge sigh, pulled him tighter for a moment, then let him go.
Oh well. Time to get back to the office. Evacuation's going pretty well. I won't be more than another 6 or 8 hours.
She looked up at him.
And thanks for coming up. I really needed that.
Captain sent me up to tell you it's time, Admiral, Dougherty said.
Coming, Senior Chief.
Jan had had one bag of her and Bill's things taken to the shuttle for the trip down. For this last trip, the shuttle was only about half full. Jan, Senior Captain Moon, their immediate staffs, and a couple dozen chiefs and senior chiefs who had ensured everybody got off. It was up to the assessment teams now.
The assessment teams took a quick initial assessment to triage the ships of Task Force 32. Then they started in-depth assessments of the less damaged ships. The goal was to get at least some of the ships in good enough shape for the trip back to Sigurdsson so they could be worked on there. The more damaged ships would be brought up to spacing condition on Kodu and head back to Sigurdsson for more work later. There was just too much work across the 16 ships to be done with Kodu's smaller repair facilities and crews. The assessments of the 3 battleships that had suffered major engineering failures would have to wait. They drifted on through the system. A month had gone by when messages came back from Sigurdsson via fast courier ship. Jan had been relieved of duty and recalled. She was to return to Sigurdsson as and when possible on the first available CSF ship. Bill got a message too. It was directly from Durand, it was encrypted, and it was short. Collection in process here. Return to SIG FB when done there. Bring evidence with you. It was also at the end of that first month that the repair crews released the 5 surviving battleships of Task Force 32 for return to Sigurdsson for final repairs. Well, Durand is locking up the evidence at that end,
and he wants me to bring the evidence from here whenever the collection is done. And we're finished, Bill said. What about the Julius Caesar, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Genghis Khan? Oh, we've been out there and collected them too, believe it or not. Really? Oh, yes. We shanghaied an assessment crew to take a team out there to them. That pesky Regulation 1702 again. They couldn't power up the system, so they just pulled the memory modules and made forensic copies with the equipment they brought along, then reinstalled them. In 0G? Jan asked. Yep. Wow. Boards of inquiry do not like excuses. Anyway, we're all wound up, and I'll have it all assembled and ready to go in the next day or 2. Then there's your orders. You know what they're trying to do, right? Of course. Have me come back as baggage on a light cruiser or something in disgrace, Jan said. Yep, so don't do it. The repair teams have the 5 surviving battleships all ready to go back to Sigurdsson, so go back with them. But I'm not in command anymore. No, but that means Sven McAllen is, and if I know his flag captain, he'd better play nice or he's going to be walking home. Wouldn't come to that. Sven and I get along. He's good people. So he's supposed to take the 5 battleships back for the rest of their repairs anyway, according to the repair guys. You should ride home on Boudica. It's the Admiral's cabin, which would be empty otherwise. Show back up at Sigurdsson with the remains of your Riven squadron, 5 limping ships, the direct result of the stupidity at NOC. The crews are all supposed to head back too. Pack 'em into the deckheads and drop 19,000 spacers, who among them know every man, woman, and child on base, onto Sigurdsson. People who were there and can tell the story of what really happened. Oh, you're bad. I like you. Bill laughed. They're still going to call me in and read me the Riot Act, though, Jan said. No, they're not. What's your first stop back at Sigurdsson? Tactical Division? Nope. Judge Advocate General. Get a lawyer first? Jan asked. Absolutely. Straight from the ship, before you even go home. And the lawyers they assign to flag rank are the nastiest ones. They keep those guys chained to their desks when they're in the office, with choke collars. Jan laughed. Then you go check in with Tactical Division. With your lawyer along, Bill said. The CNO is still going to call me in. Your lawyer will tell you to ignore it. Don't obey any orders or honor any requests that don't come through your chain of command, and don't go to any meeting with anyone without your lawyer present. Really? Really. All that time you spent running around the galaxy, I spent at Sigurdsson. I've seen this sort of thing before, and I know how the place operates. Wow. So I can just bottle them up. Yep. And if they complain, your lawyer will send them a nasty note about the penalties for interfering with the material witness to a board of inquiry and still tell you to ignore them. I never would have thought of any of that. Different kind of battle, different kind of tactics. Oh, and one more thing. The board of inquiry for ships lost in battle is always presided over by the head of the tactical division, per the regulations. And Admiral Stepik retired. So who's the head of tactical division these days? Jan's eyes widened and her jaw went slack. Yep, it's Admiral Shi. And if you don't think she has an axe to grind with the people who sent those orders out, then you don't know Jeannie Shi half as well as I thought you did. She'll recuse herself. She can't. The head of the tactical division is president of the board, period. The theory is that if they can't be impartial, they shouldn't be head of the tactical division. And besides, she won't want to. I'll bet you money she's looking forward to it. It all went down as Bill had recommended. Admiral McAllen was taking the 5 battleships back to Sigurdsson. The crews of the other 3 battleships all needed to get back as well, and their squadron mates on the 5 survivors were happy to make room for them, even to the extent of some hot bunking below decks.
Admiral McCallan said, of course, to her request to ride back on the flag deck of Boudica, as he did to Bill's request to do the same. Bill gave up his separate cabin since Jan wasn't working on the way home, and they needed the space for officers from the 3 crippled battleships.
About an hour after they came aboard, the door buzzer sounded. It was Senior Chief Dougherty. Admiral, ma'am, we're having a bit of a remembrance in the Chief's mess tonight for friends we lost on Kodu, and we were wondering if you would please attend, you and Admiral Campbell.
But, Senior Chief, they were lost under my command.
Wasn't you, ma'am, it was those Sigurdsson bastards and their stupid exercises. We all know that, Admiral. Trust me, we all know that. But we think it would be honoring our dead for you to be there, ma'am. You're one of us, and Admiral Campbell, well, he sort of married into the family. We wouldn't want to leave either of you out.
Thank you, Senior Chief. We'll be there.
Thank you, ma'am. They exchanged salutes, and Jan closed the door as Dougherty turned away. Jan turned to Bill, fell into his arms, and dissolved into tears. They understood. Paradiso lost 4 heavy cruisers, 4 light cruisers, 4 destroyers, and almost 10,000 spacers, while TF-32 lost 2 heavy cruisers, 3 light cruisers, and more than 5,000 spacers. Additionally, damage to CSS Napoleon Bonaparte was so severe she was scrapped rather than repaired. CSS Julius Caesar and CSS Genghis Khan were so badly damaged they required major refits, and all the remaining ships of TF-32 required repairs, some extensive. TF-32 was disbanded. The protection of Kodu fell to Sami Heyerdahl and TF-41, who inherited TF-32's destroyers. There would be a board of inquiry, of course. It would be held at Sigurdsson Fleet Base on Jablanka. The Navy brass that had ordered the naval exercises around Kodu 5 considered charges against Jan for negligent and unsafe ship handling and violating CSF spacing regulations, among others, resulting in the loss of 6 ships, damage to 18 others, and the deaths of over 5,000 Navy personnel, but the consideration of those charges would have to wait for the Board of Inquiry's findings.